The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts and guests as individuals, and do not necessarily reflect those of advertisers or sponsors. This show is intended as entertainment and commentary only. The producers strive for verisimilitude, but nothing said on this podcast should be taken as fact by the listener or viewer without performing due diligence.
That existence, the physical universe, is basically playful. There is no necessity for it whatsoever. It isn't going anywhere. That is to say, it doesn't have some destination that it ought to arrive at.
This is Keep Your Hat On, a show by three nerdy nobodies and one nerdy kind of somebody about nothing in particular. Keep Your Hat On is brought to you by the Narrowband Broadcast Network, NBBN. The focus is on you. By PodSquadPDX.com, painless podcasting. And by the kind support of KYHO fans everywhere through Patreon. Patreon, create on your own terms. On this episode, Dr. Mark explains that just because you have hands doesn't mean you know shiza about shoes, mein Freund. Chris is finally down from his family tree, and Andrew and Robert talk about whale spit. Sorta. Please, no sperm jokes. I'm your ever indentured announcer, Michael Bramage, and yeah, I'm still recovering from the last episode too. Now, here are the hats. Andrew, Robert, Dr. Mark, and, well, he keeps showing up. It's Chris.
Hello and welcome back. This is Keep Your Hat On, the show where hell even we don't know where we're going to go. I'm Andrew Scott, along with my good friends Robert Anthony and Christopher Vicano, and our good friend Dr. Mark C.E. Peterson. Welcome back, guys. How's everybody been over the intervening couple weeks?
Hey, doing great.
I'll edit out the silence again.
Yeah. Again. Yep.
Well, we had a hell of a show last time, didn't we, guys?
My brain is still spinning.
Well, once again, thanks, and Mark, again, pass on to Dr. Hugh Miller. Thanks so much for being part of the show.
He was so cool.
Yeah,
that was a lot of fun.
It was really enjoying to see the two of you together.
I was just going to say that having
interaction that you have was just incredible.
And having known that you guys have known each other for so long, I was anticipating fun, and I got fun.
Oh, it's crazy. One of us is Abbott and one of us is Costello, but I think
back and forth and back and forth.
Honestly.
It came across sort of like a professional sibling rivalry.
a bit.
Yeah,
sure.
That's actually pretty
I see
good.
that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to talk about, number one, we're going to try to keep this show a little bit short to give you folks all a breather. I imagine people are still going, what the... One of the things that I really valued and value today as far as my own consumption of media, being that I have a background in philosophy that means not a whole lot, but I value philosophy for how it helps me think, how it helps me view the world. And one of the things I was really grateful for is, with you and Dr. Miller, is starting to have some explorations of philosophy with three dummies like us. I mean, we are all educated to one degree or another, but we're nothing special.
You know, the funny thing about that to me, and this is one of the reasons Hugh and I got along right away, is there are different attitudes about what you're supposed to do when you do philosophy. Mm-hmm. And he and I both settled back on Plato. I think we might have mentioned this the other week, but Plato has this, my favorite definition of philosophy is from his little book called The Phaedrus. Mm-hmm. And it's just Socrates and one of his buddies go walking outside of the gates of Athens and have this conversation. But the definition, and I've really embraced this, is he just says, well, philosophy is just conversation with your friends. And it's like, you know, what I love about Plato is that sounds completely and stupidly trivial. But on the other hand, listen, we've all been up at a Waffle House or a George Webb's or an IHOP at 3 o'clock in the freaking morning with your buds,
pounding the coffee.
You know what I'm talking about? You're pounding that lousy coffee, you're eating patty melts, and you're talking shit. And it's like, and then suddenly what it does, it'll do this deep dive into the deep water, and it's like that's all he's on about. I still think that's exactly right.
Well, I think it's exactly right too. And you brought up, that was me 30 years ago, literally writing my paper on Phaedrus for you in George Webb's Eaton. And
patty melts.
For everybody else that's not a Wisconsin people, George Webb's is a long-standing institution. I imagine they're still going, Mark.
Oh yeah, they're here.
Okay, thank God.
I'm glad. Waffle House of Milwaukee.
It really is. Greasy burgers done in the best way possible. But the amount of time I clocked in at the West Bend George Webb's writing philosophy papers for you is not to be underestimated. But I like the idea of bringing more examination of these topics into just the plain old public sphere. I think I can't stand it when people are pedantic and precious about things that most people look at as an intellectual pursuit. It's an intellectual pursuit. Use your fucking intellect. We've got them. Use them. Develop them. It's a muscle just like anything else. And if all you do is consume garbage media to entertain yourself, don't get me wrong, I love videos of cats, okay? But there's more out there. And I think this is something that we're saying to you listening / viewing audience, is that we want to be a little bit more. We want to bring things into the conversation that maybe you wouldn't get somewhere else that's delivered in the same way. We all like to laugh. We all like to examine the world through our own twisted, warped eyes and
lenses and filters.
And that's just it. And the more people have access to these kinds of concepts in a way that they can understand, I don't want to make palatable, but understand more easily, and then go out and look, or even better, shoot us questions. And by the way, Dr. Mark, we didn't tell you, but you now have an address. You can get a hold of hi-ho at Keep Your Hat On Podcast, KYHOpodcast.com.
My original email address. Thank you, Annie.
You're welcome. I got to keep that alive, man. That's one of my fondest memories.
A couple thoughts here. First of all, it's ridiculous and maybe a little bit appalling, and it feels really silly and strange to be in a place to say this. But in the 21st century and where we're at, I feel like it's totally appropriate, and that's just that it's okay to think.
Yeah.
That's
actually pretty well kernelized.
So there was a few things. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Chris. I didn't mean.
Oh, thank you. The second thought that off of that last episode, that was sort of our springboard. One of the things I really appreciated about getting to sit down and talk with you guys was sort of understanding just the framework of how philosophy has built up over time and where the building blocks fit, and that the later philosophers are building on the work of the earlier philosophers, and it is sort of structural. And in fact, it was really funny this week because I saw a quote that made me think of you and Dr. Hugh, Mark, and that was philosophy. Anything after Aristotle is irrelevant.
Well, I gotta say, for me, even though my mind ended up
gelatized
in a fetal position in the corner a few times, what I really enjoyed was being pushed outside my comfort zone. And being introduced to these things helped me firm up and solidify my values and my beliefs, maybe just a little bit more. Right?
But it's never fucking aliens. Sorry, bud.
We'll
get to that.
You just wait. We'll get there. But really, firming up my mind and being challenged to sift through things and figure out what it is that I wanted to hold on to in terms of a philosophy, of a perspective. And I think that we all forget especially when we're challenged like that, we forget that we're being challenged like that. And that's what the crux of the matter and the whole exercise is about.
I think it's part of that is you guys are seeing this through your Zen practice too. And there's this weird kind of wrinkle in the notion of what philosophy is, which is that for the Greeks, it meant love of wisdom, right? That's what it literally means. But the wisdom part, everybody goes, oh, mysterious wisdom. It's like, now, wisdom is, and this comes out of Plato and Aristotle, but they invented the word, so there you go.
Yeah.
The wisdom part is recognizing your own ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why you need friends. This is why you need to have conversations with your friends, because you can't see your own ignorance, right?
No, it's like biting your own teeth. Yeah.
And you can't pull the knife out of your own back. This is why you need friends, right? Because they can see what you're missing. And you need to see what you're missing just to become a complete human being. And people hate that, though, Ty. That's what you're sort of,
Yeah, I was just going to say that people, you need your friends, but we've gotten into this culture now where your friends are divided and siloed in who believes what I believe and who's going to back up my,
who agrees with me, who's my ride or die.
Yeah. And so I agree, but I think that's one of the things that we want to do is we want to be your friends that maybe have a different view.
Absolutely right. That's what you need that's what friends are for, really. One of the weirdest things I started doing this about probably 10 years ago or something now is I would get into it with some people I know locally on the local Facebook groups for like the school board or like local government and all this stuff. And you'd find people in there trolling the thing, right? Typically.
Yeah.
And I would just engage with them. And then when things got really heated, I'd invite them to go have coffee.
Yeah.
And it was amazing to see what would happen. Is 9 times out of 10, they would say, absolutely not, because they were afraid to. But the times when they've actually done this, it's like, you just have to listen to people who are angry like this and give them a chance to talk. And then when you treat them decently, then they stop being jerks about it.
Yeah, it's the old internet saying it's always easier being a rampant asshole at a distance.
That's right.
Right. Yeah, when you're separated by these barriers of a keyboard and a computer screen, and it's much easier to engage in a productive dialogue and really connect with somebody when you sit down face to face, and even more when you do it over a cup of coffee or you break bread together, you share a meal.
Yeah, and that's
when you get to know somebody.
And the thing for me, and it's interesting that when I first met Dr. Mark, which was 1991, we were both pretty major computer. Yeah, I'm sorry. We were both pretty much major computer users, and we were both getting on the internet. Not dial-up. We were both getting on the internet at the same time. He through the university, and me because my dad was a major guy in industry, and he was bringing me home all these crazy-ass computers when I was a child. So, but things like FidoNet and news groups and all that stuff, we were Usenet. We were doing that at the same time, and we both, I think, saw the amazing utility of being able to communicate over vast distances, both physical distances and intellectual distances as well. We were aware of the fact that, and I remember actually, Mark, you and I having a conversation where we were kind of riffing on, well, what could possibly go wrong with this internet thing? And I don't remember which one of us brought it up. It was probably you, but I was feeling the same thing, and that is the only thing that I'm really concerned about, which is a positive and a negative. The positive is that you have safety and anonymity, where you can put your voice out there and not fear direct reprisal. But then on the other side of the coin but then you've got that anonymity, which means that the assholes are going to come out of the woodwork like termites swarming.
Yeah,
and they did figure it out. Although for a while, I mean, there was a pretty good run where, people were pretty. I mean, flame wars would break out on Usenet, and that was usually more points of contention. The thing that struck me in those early days of the internet, and I was doing a lot of mudding and mushing, and
Mud,
And I
for
especially-
people who don't know, Mud and Mush are game platforms that were used in the early days.
Mudding is gaming.
Yeah, multi-user
and then mushing
dungeon.
was just kind of pre-Facebook. It was socialization.
Exactly. It was a socialization mechanism.
It was hang out and talk. And I especially liked the mushes because it was a chance to like get to know people and not have this whole pretense of a game. And, you know, my elf pulls out his +2 sword and stabs it in the dragon's throat. You know, I mean, I love gaming. Don't get me wrong. I'm
I
really
think you
into
just
that.
gave that away to people, Chris.
Yeah. But
Not sure.
But there were times where I found I really enjoyed just sort of connecting with people. And one of the things I observed, even in those early days, was because of that safety and anonymity, a lot of people found that they could be the person that they wanted to be, not the person they really were, or they could project any sort of image of who they were. But if you came into that context, and a lot of people were using it for, you know, very self-serving purposes, you know, guys being on there trying to pick up on girls, you know, trying to puff themselves up to be, you know, much more masculine and what have you than they really were. But if you met that with authenticity, you know, and transparency, and hey, you know, this is who I am, and good self-awareness, it would tend to crumble in the course of a conversation, and you could start to get to who the real person is. And what I found is that the real person behind the facade
was almost always more interesting. Yeah, I think
much more.
But Mark, I think your technique of taking it from the virtual into the 3D realm, I think, is one of the most powerful techniques there is. Yeah. Because when you're in somebody's bubble, when you're able to literally and figuratively reach across a table and see the fellow humanity that's shared, that right there, that's one of the most powerful tools there is for understanding.
The first time I did this, it really scared the hell out of me, honestly, because it was like, oh, here we go. And the guy, who I won't tell you his name, but I'm really fond of him, and he is a right-wing fundamentalist Christian who believes that evolution is cooked up and all the rest of this. And we would get into these little tussles on the local West Bend school board page about what they ought to be learning in class and stuff. But what I noticed was that he was always civil. You know what I mean? And it's like he didn't have to be, and it turns out that's because he actually took his Christianity seriously.
Oh, all right then. Well,
Boom.
Well,
so it's like we ended up having coffee, and it turned, we chased this down. He and I are still joking that he and I are going to come up with a manifesto from the left and the right at the same time and walk into a school board meeting together. I just invited this other guy out. We'll see what he says. The other day, we got into it on Wisconsin Public Radio. And
what do you mean, the validity thereof?
Well, I got into it. I made some crack about, the local Republican Party is once again denying it's not accepting federal funds to help fix the schools because blah, 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 blah. And I made some crack about, wouldn't it be nice if they voted for a more just and equitable America? And this guy jumped down on me and he goes, there is nothing in our Constitution about America being a just and fair society. You should really study history. And so I just wrote him back and I quoted the preamble to the Constitution. And I said,
in order to form a more perfect union.
What about that part?
Yeah.
And then he comes back, he goes, well, nice cherry picking.
Oh, Jesus.
And it was like
cherry picking.
So I wrote
wow.
it back. And I'm just giving you a sense of the ramp up here. So
well, and it's like they put it first because it's the most important.
That's like pointing at the tent pole and going, "Oh yeah, way to point to the only thing that's holding this entire thing up."
See, that's right. So I wrote back and I said, "Well, let's review." I said, you asked me. I said, he said, "There's nothing in there." I said, "But the preamble, like the whole point of it, says that we should." And he wrote back something, blah, 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 communist, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I know. He said, you have no understanding of what our founding fathers had in mind for this country. So, it's one of these things. And these are all I think these are all just like internet troll, like algorithms, right?
Yeah.
Well, so
you're right. They happen on their
point.
own without personal intervention sometimes.
So, of course, now at this point, now I stalk him. So I go look at his Facebook feed. And he's just over in Hartford. He's just over here, 20 minutes away. So I invited him over for coffee. So we'll see how it goes.
Well, I tell you what, I tell you what, folks, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. And one of the things that we're going to talk about is the anti-intellectualism that is happening in our world right now. And then we're also going to talk about maybe some of the reasons why pursuing and understanding a little bit of formal philosophy is useful. But meanwhile, you're watching Keep Your Hat On, the show where hell even we don't know where we're going to go. I'm Chris. I'm not Chris.
No, you're not.
And you know what? I'm going to be fair, and I'm not even going to edit it. I'm not going to edit that out.
You know what? I think you should say,
I'm Chris. That's Phil. Yeah. That's Bob. No, you're not Bob.
Whoa.
I'm Andrew Scott.
Everybody wants to be Chris.
That's Chris Vacano.
My dad's name is Bob.
That's not Bob. That is Robert. And that's Dr. Mark with the only Tootsie Pop in the mix today. And we'll be back after this. This is the Narrowband Broadcast Network. Sit tight. We'll be back in a second. Bye.
We'll be right back. Really.
And hello and welcome back. This is Keep Your Hat On. I'm Andrew Scott, along with the Wiggly Figures, Dr. Mark Peterson, Robert Anthony, and Chris Vacano. And we're going to talk a little bit about something that I think we've all been suffering, I guess I'd say it, in our society and culture these days, and that is, when did it suddenly become wrong to be more educated and to pursue intellectual ideas that maybe don't necessarily jibe with your personal feelings about a topic? And Dr. Mark, you've been wading through this now, both publicly as an educator and privately as just a good citizen of our fair nation. And you've been engaging purposefully with people who have not only opposing views, but aggressively opposing views, and then in the public forum they're being very vociferous and vocal about this. What's your take on this? Why have we, and you as an educator, why have we suddenly gone from bettering yourself intellectually is always good, a la, Plato's Cave and Aristotle, to criticizing people who have intellect, criticizing their ideas, criticizing their pursuit of a broader view? Where does that come from? And I have no fucking idea is a totally acceptable answer.
I'm just looking here for it. So there was a very famous book by Richard Hofstadter in 1963 called Anti-Intellectualism in American Life, 1963. And when I think about this, there's always been a real... So if I think about this psychologically, the real dangers with... And see, the word intellectual is itself kind of like this opaque mask of something else. It's like a boogeyman. But because what we're really talking here about is just thinking things through, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what the real trick to this is not just thinking things through, but to think back to see what you've assumed, right? I always like, when I talk about this in class and stuff, here's the interesting thing about trains. Trains always go where the tracks are. And so, I know.
Hopefully.
And so the trick, the people always ask, but so if the trains are our belief, people always ask about why you have the train you do. And that's not the question. The question is, why are the tracks there? And so it's all of the things that we start with as assumptions that kind of dictate where our thinking goes. Now, so this is the 25-cent psychological answer to this. But I think this is right. This goes all the way back again. This goes back to the Greeks and Western civilization, but you can see traces of this, in Buddhism and Taoism and all the rest, every place else in the world. So people don't like to have their fundamental beliefs questioned, even questioned, because they treat it as an attack on themselves.
Right.
And if you think about it, the things we believe, that is who we are, right? That's not just, it's not just like, it's like the stuff in my fridge, right? That's just, these are just the, things I have right now. No, our beliefs actually are our identity. And so I think this is part of it, is that when you start asking people to justify or to, why do you think this? They treat it as a personal attack.
Right. It's almost like saying, why are you ugly?
Almost. Well, it's the presupposition that you're ugly. And it's like, this also makes the assumption that, so usually when I do this in class, this is the usual punchline, the usual joke technique for this is I'll pick some poor kid who hasn't said anything yet, usually. And I'll say, so here's your question. Is everything you believe true? And then they'll usually go for a minute and go, okay, it's a trick question, obviously. So then they'll think about it and they'll go, okay, no, not everything I believe is true. And then I'll say, well, then why do you believe it? Boom.
Yeah.
And the reason is that, so this is just me spitballing this for the last 40 years, but I think this is probably right. About 90% of the people I actually ever talk to don't really even know what they believe. What they do is they simply trot out whatever they heard last. Mm-hmm. And this explains any number of people on the political fringes, because they haven't really thought through what they're doing. They just, whatever they heard last, they just pop out, right? So about 90% of the people don't know what they believe. And then for the rest of them, the people who actually do know what they believe, almost nobody really takes the time to figure out why they believe the things they do. And, because it's just inherent, most of it, right? I mean, it's by the time you're 4 or 5.
It's the narratives that we're fed throughout our life that shape and inform our view of the world.
Well, and you don't get to pick any of those.
No,
right?
and in Zen
like
we often refer to that as your story. And one of the things that we very often say when we're dealing with this concept of what do I believe, what do I know, what do I feel, all that, the nexus points of all those things, is the best progress is made when you drop your story and you step outside of your story.
Yeah, but think about how hard that is, right?
Oh, yeah.
This is like telling the goldfish. It's
frightening to let go of that.
Yeah, it's just like telling the goldfish that it's in a bowl, and then when it says prove it, and you pull it out of the bowl and it can't breathe, it is really uncomfortable for the fish.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I have, as I'm listening, I'm hearing a lot of why questions. And one of the things that really helped my communication was when I realized that asking why is an indication that somebody's done something wrong.
Sometimes, well, very often,
a better way to come at a question instead of why is how. How did you come to that viewpoint?
Exactly.
How did you come to land there?
Because then you're looking at the process.
Bit more curiosity, and within that curiosity, creating that vessel of curiosity, you actually get that person to open up and to start explaining and examining a little bit more.
And it's a great technique, and I've done similar in the past through learning and being trained in nonviolent communication and NVC.
Oh, here we go.
And that is that, if you ask somebody why, they are immediately defensive. If you ask somebody how, everybody likes to talk about themselves.
Yeah,
and so giving them an opportunity or an avenue to explain themselves and their journey will, get you to an endpoint faster. And also, generally speaking, it'll be a more genuine explanation because they don't feel the need to throw up a bunch of rationalizations to their choices.
Right.
I think Hal also puts us opens our thinking onto the helping track. Mm-hmm. So you're seeking their help when you say how.
Yeah.
You've basically opened the door and expressed that you are receptive to new information.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is really important to emphasize this, because this is a way to really get at, I think, the sort of psychological problem, the dangers that people feel when you start asking this stuff. When you're doing this like conflict mediations, right? This is the one thing, as they say, you never ask why. You never ask why, because it immediately polarizes the situation. But think about why, right? Think about why it polarizes the situation. It's because, and this is again spitballing. Most people don't know why they do the things they do. I'm gonna just lay down with that one.
Well, and they don't
true,
want to
also,
examine why they believe it.
Oh no, my God! Think about, you're opening up the box, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the real danger. This is why, for instance, the same thing applies here for you guys. It's like, I challenge my students when I'm in this sort of content zone to try to sit quietly on, if any of you done any meditation before, it's like, no, okay, before you go to bed tonight, sit on the end of your bed and stare at your clock quietly for 10 minutes and see how long you last.
Yeah. For a newbie that's just like dragging them over the coals. It's, oh my
I'm
God,
going to
this is
tell
so
you
uncomfortable.
right now, having held a number of positions in the Zendo,
Yeah.
one of those being a timekeeper.
Yeah, same. We were both doing
And
that for
basically
years.
what that means is you get to keep track of the time and call everybody back from wherever they go in meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I had this position, I'll tell you what, I had this idea of, you know what? This time I'm just going to stare at the clock. It was the longest
Your eyes
20
itch
minutes.
so bad. Oh my God.
It was the longest 20 minutes that I ever sat, and I never did it again.
No. It is so uncomfortable. And I did the same. Robert, I actually think you took over from timekeeping for me while we were still at the old building, if I remember that right. And I did something very similar where, we had this remember that beat up clock that we used to use? It looked like a kitchen timer. I actually always wanted it to go off and go ding. But the being observant of the measurement of time while it happens just makes your eyes want to bulge out of their sockets like Marty Feldman. It is just so uncomfortable. And then I started to do, because in our tradition, generally speaking, we don't meditate with our eyes closed. We meditate with our eyes partially closed, but open and observant. And I started doing it where I did the math, and I figured out how long it would be in my own measured breaths. And I wouldn't look at the clock. And then I would give myself like a 10-second cushion before I was supposed to ring the bell. And then I would look at the clock and see how close I was to time. I was always so wildly off. There were a couple of them where we had 26 minutes worth of meditation. But the idea that your own sense of your own belief is something that I find inherently powerful. I'm not going to try to come off as being something bigger and greater than I am. I have my own entrenched beliefs, but at the same time, I've always, from my philosophy background, then transitioned into my active Buddhist practice. I've always made a point of trying to keep myself open to be challenged, because I saw in members of my family this intellectual entrenchment and a building of walls around beliefs. And I saw that it just made certain members of my family effectively, mentally, spiritually, emotionally atrophy. There is no growth when you've got everything surrounded. It's like the saying that the strongest corn that grows in a field is the one that's most exposed to wind, because it's tested early on. And I see that very same thing. If you don't allow yourself to be tested, if you don't allow your beliefs to be tested, they're not going to be very strong. And then at some point in time, when the right earthquake comes along and that intellectual silo collapses, your beliefs are going to just be shredded by the shallowest of breezes.
Yeah. If you don't go into that crucible and let your metal get properly fired, it's going to become brittle and shatter. You know, for me, what really opened up my thinking, and you guys got me sort of thinking back to this, when I was in art school, in my first year, I had this professor who actually I worked with throughout my time in art school. I referred to him as my tour mentor.
I get it.
And he was great. He was because he pushed me really hard. But in that first year, I had come in. You know, I had already been painting. I had already sort of found what I thought was a voice. I was doing work a certain way, a certain style of work. And I was constantly fighting with it and getting very frustrated that the work wasn't, you know, what was appearing on the substrate, on the canvas or the board or whatever, was not what was in my head or what I wanted it to be. And you know, he taught me very much that it's a dance between the two, and you really have to listen to the canvas and let it, you know, let it be your guide and let it be what it's becoming. And at one point, he because he was getting frustrated with me because I was so stubbornly clinging to, you know, this preciousness about my work. And he said, "Okay, Chris, you keep trying to make good work. You should run at making bad work. You should. Your assignment for the next 3 weeks is to go out,
Crank out the garbage,
bring back 3 absolutely horrendous paintings. You know, just
it's an awesome
really
technique.
Bad.
Yeah.
And what it did for me was it expanded out into my thinking about how I think about things, and into my worldview of and untangling identity from ideas. It got me to a place where I have no fear of being wrong, and in fact, a lot of times I'll run at being wrong so that I can be righted, because that's how I learn.
There's a kind of artistic temperament that's really handy here, which is that everybody who does anybody who's in the performing arts, you know, visual arts, any kind of art at all, the only way you're ever going to get good is when you get this eye for self-criticism and you can see what you're doing wrong, right? Mm-hmm. And it'd be nice if you could carry that over into the rest. You know, if people could learn to do that and then carry it over into the rest of their lives. But somehow the beliefs that we have about ourselves remain inviolable, right? Mm-hmm. So you can criticize somebody's technique, but that doesn't mean I'm not an awesome artist. You know people like this, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Right? I'm the best artist in the world. It's like, well, you know, your work really sucks. It's like, yeah, but I'm still great. Yeah. It's like, okay.
Yeah, and I think actually, you know, this underscores a couple of things. Most of the you know, the really dedicated and trained artists, I think there are artists who are serious about what they do and carry it with them through life. And I view art less as a practice and more as a worldview, a way you approach the world, a way you do things. The practice is almost the byproduct of that. But most of the really dedicated, serious artists, the ones who have committed themselves to it, or even more so, the ones who are driven, because like me, I've had a number of people ask me through my life, what prompted you to become an artist? You know, why do you paint? And my answer is because I can't not make art. Yeah, there is a drive deep inside of me that I don't understand, and I don't need to understand. I just follow it. But those serious artists, they do bring that temperament. They bring that view and that ability for self-criticism. I've seen the extreme other side of the coin, where sort of more the dabblers that we had come through our art school classes and that I've encountered out in the world since then, who are, I mean, first of all, they're so intimidated by making art because they're aware that there are all these dedicated, committed artists out there in the world. And so they really cling on to it as an identity thing, and to the point where they're almost apologetic. And if you criticize, particularly if your criticism is challenging or harsh, they can take it very, very personally. Like you've just deconstructed them. And
That's it.
and it's something I think you also learn as an artist. You learn to read and understand people and read the room. And you learn diplomacy.
Well, I think this whole thing brings us around to an interesting point, Chris, and an interesting point to pivot, and that is, you brought up why you pursue art, why you became an artist. Mark, why did you pursue philosophy? Why did you become a philosopher? What was there at your stepping out point that made you go, oh, I don't want to do this, I have to do this?
And I would love to give you a romantic version of mystical insights.
Right.
That would be bullshit.
Yeah, fair enough.
The real reason is like I really loved everything I did in college. And part of the trigger was, so like the literature and history. I was a history philosophy double major, and I think I almost have minors in like German and statistics, and it's just fucked up after that. But the real reason was, it was like, and it wasn't like, I had this like longing and love of intellectual activity. I really liked learning about everything. And, I grew up, my dad was a scientist. I grew up watching test tubes in his labs and stuff. And so I was probably not going to go do science because it's like, okay. But all this other stuff I was fascinated in. And so when I got to, junior year or so, and I have to sort of declare majors, I had history and philosophy, but the only thing that would let me do everything was philosophy.
Right.
So if I kept going in college, see, I could have always quit and gone. I was going to go to work for newspapers, right? I was thinking about journalism, that sort of thing. But I thought, let's try graduate school and see how it goes. The only discipline that let me do literally everything was philosophy. And so, for instance, I did all my outside coursework in the history of science and technology, right, for instance, and so tons of history and all the rest of that. So that was pretty much it. And so it's like there was nothing specifically about philosophy as a discipline.
It was wholly and totally selfish. Philosophy was the thing that was going to keep you most entertained.
Essentially right. I think that's right.
That's as good a reason as any. I wish more people would make their decisions like that.
I mean,
I'm listening to Chris, and by the way, Chris, I've stalked some of your work, and I love your paintings, dude. But I
thank
hate
you.
them.
We'll throw a couple of them up here. We have the ability to do that.
Put them up there for me. Yeah, the reason I hate you.
Can I get the rights, Chris?
Is that I actually
Yes, of course.
I actually studied watercolor pretty seriously, and it didn't help at all. and it's funny because I'm Facebook friends now with my high school art teacher, who was like one of the great teachers I ever had, this guy James Kirkpatrick. And I learned a lot from him. And one of the things I learned was that you really have to draw all the freaking time if you want to get good at painting. And I just never did.
Yeah, well, it's true enough reason.
It's true, and you have to draw in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit hard to explain, but it's everything from drawing in a little notepad, doing little doodles, on up to full body life drawing sessions at an easel, where the physicality of the mark making is completely different, because then you start to train your muscle memory, and that translates to brush strokes.
My favorite cousin of all time, my cousin Diane, who was my mother's age, and she's been dead for a few years now, but she was a real artist. She was up in Minneapolis, and I knew her my whole life, and I never saw her once without a sketch pad or something, doodling something in her hand.
Yeah.
But so this is the kind of dedication it takes to do that. But so I was thinking about art too, but it's like I'm really good at aesthetics, but I'm very bad at painting.
That's why you pursue woodworking then.
I'm pretty good in 3D.
I know you are, actually. I still remember Elvis. I still really.
He's on the front porch. I'll
Is he
get a
still
picture of him.
really?
We can put him up here.
Excellent.
Oh, he looks terrible.
No, it's
Yeah,
absolutely ghastly, and I loved it from the moment I first saw it.
He's worse now. I'll send you a picture. You can put him up.
Time has not been kind to the king.
You know, I think you guys are on the right track here. This is what, and this is my personal view. I'm something of a heretic among my artist friends because I don't believe, and this is not all my artist friends by any stretch, but there is an undercurrent of thinking that only certain media are high art media or are correct art media.
Well, at least Banksy came along and said "fuck you" to all those people.
Well, yeah, I mean spray paint, sure,
Yeah.
but let's get away from
Go to
paint on
Warhol,
a
man.
surface. I mean,
Right?
The people who stack rocks, that is art.
Yeah,
Andy Goldsworthy.
right?
I love that guy.
Yeah, phenomenal. And that's just
I'm sorry, Chris.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Well, no, that was sort of the completion of my point. Is for me, art is the assembling of objects in a way that they would not otherwise have come together had it not been for your intervention as the artist.
Well, and, you know, I'm going to go back and grab a word that Peterson taught me, and I remember just how much learning about this word blew my doors off. And that is this concept, this Greek concept of arete. For me, arete is really, truly the nexus point for art. And that is, like you said, Chris, building rock cairns or doing some of these crazy balancing things with rocks. That, to me, that's as arty needs to be, because somebody did that with such a sense of excellence. And who's this new phenom gymnast? Simone, can't remember her name.
She's been around for a while.
Well, it shows how much I've been paying attention to gymnastics.
She's been phenomenal for a while.
She's
about -4'2", and watching her just watching her walk across a room.
Simone Biles.
Simone Biles, thank you very
art.
much. Absolutely art. And I mean, I'm not even going to go into.
She's exploring the material of what a body can do.
And the same thing with a lot of my, I spent a lot of years as a DJ. And I often go toe to toe with people who say, well, you're not a real musician. And I spent, Mark, you remember the old escape club in West Bend that burnt down? That's where I was DJing a lot of my time while I was in college and in high school, and later I was DJing in Milwaukee. But, I always prided myself on people coming up to me after a show and saying, you took me somewhere. Yeah. It's not just listening to me. That right there, that's art. I get very angry with people, like you were saying, Chris, when they make so precious one aspect of it or another. And when we come back from this break, we're going to kind of pivot off of that and talk a little bit about why a pursuit of understanding philosophy is worth a shit. And with that, this is the Narrowband Broadcast Network. We are the guys from Keep Your Hat On. That's Chris, that's Rob, that's Mark, I'm Andy. We'll be right back after this break. Don't go anywhere. Oh, good stuff. We're getting better at flying by the seat of our asses. Alexa, play the latest episode of Keep Your Hat On podcast on Amazon Music.
Here's Keep Your Hat On from Amazon Music.
So that's a thing you can do now. And welcome back once again to Keep Your Hat On. I don't know why I'm talking like this. This is Andrew Scott, that's Chris Vacano, that's Robert Anthony, and that is Dr. Mark Peterson, professor of philosophy. And it just so happens it's handy that we have a philosopher around because I'm going to ask a very philosophical question. And that is, Dr. Mark Peterson, why does philosophy even fucking matter?
So, I'll tell you a funny joke. So,
Oh, I'll be the judge of that.
yeah, you'll let me know.
Do I have my rim shot plugged in? I don't think I do.
Yeah.
I'll drop that
Boom.
in. Yeah.
One of the great weirdnesses in my philosophical career was to discover that Hegel, who is like by acclamation like the most difficult, pain in the ass stuff to read ever written in the history of any language.
I'll back you up there.
Yeah. Oh, but it turns out that he can be hilarious, and so here's a brief example. In the introduction to the logic in the Encyclopedia of Philosophical Sciences, he sort of answers this question about why does this matter, and he says here's an interesting thing. He says that nobody believes that just because they have a pair of hands that they can make shoes, right? In order to, everybody will agree that in order to learn to make shoes, even though you need your hands, you need to learn about leather. You need to study feet. You need to know what kinds of foot coverings people like, right? And then you also need to practice like crazy, right? The first time you make a pair of shoes, you got to go find your own master. You got to go find Geppetto, right?
Right.
And you apprentice yourself to Geppetto, and he makes you sweep the floors for 2 years, and then he introduces you to leather, and step by step he brings you along. And after lots of practice, right, you make your first pair of shoes, you get critiqued, you figure out what you did wrong. You get the idea here, right? So it takes a lot of years and a lot of practice to get good at making shoes, even though we have hands. He says, so here's the thing. Nobody will admit that just because you have a pair of hands, you know how to make shoes. He says, everybody believes that just because you have a brain, you know how to think.
Yeah.
And it's like, I remember reading that and going, I remember looking at the guy I was reading. We were doing this in a study group in German. I looked at it, I was like, was that a joke? Anyway, apparently. So, but it's
Right.
well, it's like,
Well,
what?
that's the old.
But it's brutally.
But it's very true. It's
Well,
very
and
true.
you taught
true.
me, Dr. Mark, that the best jokes always wind up in the footnotes.
The best jokes I got that. Actually, I learned that from Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which is one of those things nobody ever reads. But trust me, just read his footnotes about the Christians. That will change your mind forever. Anyway, he didn't think too much about Christianity.
Not really.
So, but here's the thing: is like philosophy gives you the opportunity to sort of exercise your brain. I mean, I never try to turn any student into a philosopher. That'd be irresponsible. But what I do tell them is like, when you seriously engineering, my friend.
I was just gonna say it's like teaching people how to make pipe bombs.
Sure. So something you can do something.
Right.
But the beauty of it is it gives you an opportunity to practice thinking things through. And that's not something you can just do. It actually takes some practice. And part of it was what we were talking about before, which the idea of being able to be self-critical. So Chris is talking about in art, and you guys are talking about your observations off the cushion. That practice of becoming aware of what you think about things and how they condition your actions and all the rest of that stuff, that shit takes practice. You can't just go, oh, I got this now.
Yeah.
And so I think everything we've been talking about comes back to this idea of you have to sit your ass down and you have to practice whatever it is you're doing. And when you're practicing, what you're really doing, and this is the sort of the meat and potatoes here, when you practice, you don't just repeat the same things over and over again. When you practice, the whole trick in practicing is to figure out what you're doing wrong, right? And when you're figuring out what you're doing wrong is you're looking for the parts that are missing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're looking for the parts that are missing, what you're trying to figure out is what you're ignorant about. And this wraps us back around to the Greek idea of what wisdom was, which meant knowing finding out what you don't know. And so practice is what does that.
Yeah, if I could chime in, one of the other components of practice is not just figuring out what you're missing, what you're doing wrong, sort of that critical perspective of it, but it's giving yourself the opportunity to discover new things that you had never thought of before. A new, in my case, like a new way to twist the brush to get a certain brush stroke effect.
Yeah.
A lot of times it happens purely by accident, but you're like, hey, that was really cool. Now I can add that to my arsenal.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that, Chris, and thank you for that analogy because it's perfect, and that is really for me, my best times in being educated, I'll say, were when I was coming at it from a place of, I'm going to use this term, mere observation. I was observing what I was doing and what I was learning. And some of the best points of growth are exactly what you just explained, where something happens on accident, but you're dialed in and you're paying attention. It happens in Zen, it happens in Tai Chi, it happens, whatever you're doing. If your baseline is I'm observing what's going on, and then something happens either surreptitiously or serendipitously or accidentally, and you're there and you felt it happen, and you stand back and you go, wow, yeah, okay, because now it's not merely intellectual. It is a physical, visceral understanding, comprehension, and apprehension of what just happened. And then you can carry that forward. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I will always, I mean, if I'm one thing in this world for my time on this planet, is I want to be teachable. I want to learn. I want to keep gathering those experiences, not filing them away like they're monolithic points on a data line. I want them to be able to shift. I want to be able to change how I view given new experiences, not necessarily just new education, but new experiences about the life that I'm in. And that's where we're kind of going with this, where the Hegel analogy of just because you got feet or just because you got hands doesn't mean you know anything about that. You can practice it. Just because you have a brain, you don't necessarily know how to, and I mean, yes, we all know how to think, but taking that in a meta direction and saying, do I really know how to examine something, including things that are already in here?
Yeah. See, I don't think people think that thinking is a skill.
No.
And that's sort of where all this goes back to. It's like, this is the important thing, is like it reduces thought itself. It's a skill set, man. And it's like those of you, you know, if you're in art or if you're in Zen, you realize that this thing, you could, you know, it just floats around all over the place, right?
It's that monkey. It's the monkey.
Just taking that a step higher, and say that most people don't think of thinking as an active activity, but rather think of it as a passive activity. It's just something that happens.
Yeah.
You know, my thoughts go through my head, and I don't. And it's when you step back into that sort of meta of yourself and observe your thinking.
Well, and I think,
and you realize
I think
that it's a process and an activity that you are engaging in.
And I think something that Ty and I have that Dr. Mark, you share a little bit, is this idea of no matter if you're doing motion exercises, and in Zen we have motion exercises, we have Kin-Hin, which is walking very slow and then walking very fast, and a few other physical practices. But this idea that when you are thinking, you're not actually doing something. It's not actually a thing. It's like this magical thing where, and in Zen, you know, we often refer to, because people struggle, they think that when they're meditating, they should have an empty mind. It's nothing like that whatsoever. Your mind is nothing but a gigantic echo chamber, and the smallest sound will reverberate for hours. So we often, when we instruct people in Zen meditation, we say, when a thought comes into your head, treat it like it's a cloud going through the sky, and it's just here and gone, just like clouds do. Same thing with a physical practice like Todd.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Or serving tea or whatever. And this idea that thinking is autonomic. Well, yes, on one hand, it is. Obviously, I wake up in the morning and the first thing I think about is, shit, I wish I was still asleep. But at the same time, there is an active role you play in how you think. And spending some time either formally in a college or an institution that of higher learning that helps you develop that muscle, and I use that term on purpose, develop this muscle, or
That's right.
on your own, learning about concepts that you have no idea about. I completely understand. And again, thanks to everybody who watched the full episode last time. We know that it was kind of a journey, but you made it through and you done good. Thumbs up from all us hats, because it was a lot to take in. But just because something is a lot to take in doesn't mean it's too much work for value. And that drives me really crazy. I don't want to be one of these people that says, well, people now are intellectually lazy. But we've got a big bunch of people now who think that thinking and expanding their intellect comes from just watching YouTube videos of somebody pontificating in their basement. And it might be a little bit broader than that.
Yeah. I think it is quite a bit broader than that.
Well, Mark, if you had to give somebody a place to start, where would it be? I mean, I'm talking about let's go with the classical canon of philosophy. Everybody, even if you don't know what it is, they've heard about Plato's cave. What would be a good primer for people if they want to start examining their life or their experience or the news or whatever through a slightly different lens that's attenuated by classical philosophy?
Where everybody starts with Plato's little book called The Apology. And this is about I think it's hilarious, but it's Socrates' trial, where he explains why it is they ended up putting him on trial, and it explains why they're going to kill him. and he explains why.
So it's a cliffhanger.
Yeah, no, well, they kill him.
He dies in the end.
You know, the Titanic sinks.
Yeah.
They kill him, but there's some pretty funny stuff on the way there, and. Everybody who saw Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, the character of Socrates in that thing actually kind of nailed it.
Spot on.
And so that's where everybody in Western philosophy starts, is with the apology. And apology just means his defense at his trial.
Yeah, apologia.
And that's
before he drinks the hemlock, right?
Right. I drank what?
It's actually a month before he drinks the hemlock. Yeah, about a month, because they can't kill him right away. There's a religious festival that they have to get in the way. And so there's a bunch of those earlier dialogues where Plato actually walks through Socrates on his way to the courtroom, Socrates in the courtroom. There's this delay afterwards in a text called the Crito, Crito, where his buddies arrange to bribe the guards and bust him out of jail after they've convicted him and are going to sentence him to death. And he tells them he can't go. Yep. And they say, why not? He goes, well, it wouldn't be right. He said, but they convicted you. And you can laugh about this now, but it's like, we'll share this with you, and you can edit this as you wish, Andy.
Thanks.
One of the reasons I went into philosophy, I can tell you this now, this was like intro philosophy, 1975, fall. It might have been late in the spring. And Jerry Ford had pardoned the
Nixon.
draft dodgers in Vietnam.
Oh, okay.
So I'm at the back. I'm the freshman sitting in the back of the room with a bunch of guys who were coming through on the GI Bill who'd been in Vietnam, and a bunch of guys who'd been in Canada and Sweden. And so Dr. Donaldson got up and he asked this question. He goes, so if your society asks you to do something unjust, do you have to do it? And in Plato's answer to this is, yeah, you do. Which is not very satisfying.
No.
But here's what happened. We had veterans who'd been in Nam who knew full well that Vietnam was an unjust war, and they went because their country asked them to go, right? Okay. And then we had these guys who'd been in Sweden and Canada who had fled America and refused to go to war because it was unjust. You got this? And they knew it was, so they'd bailed out. And when Donaldson asked this question, man, all fucking hell broke loose in that classroom. Because these guys were not, draft dodgers weren't cowards.
No.
It wasn't just that they wanted to avoid dying in Vietnam. They were making a political statement about the injustice of the war. And the guys who'd gone to Vietnam weren't a bunch of morons who just, followed orders like sheep. They knew that they knew they were in the shit for bad reasons. There wasn't anybody who served in Vietnam who thought, yeah, this is awesome. That was the generals in Washington.
Yeah.
And so
As it
these two
always
guys
is.
had these opposing views, and so desks were thrown.
Ho, 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 ho.
And I'm in the back.
Wow.
Legit
Back of the room, and
Donnybrook.
all I can think of is, oh my God, philosophy is cool.
Well, I tell you what, we're going to take one more quick break on that note, and then come back, and we're going to wrap up a little bit of our exploration of young Chris's family tree.
Some loose ends.
Yeah, and other than that, sit tight, keep your hat on. Andy, Mark, Chris, Rob, or Ty, or Bobblehead. I shouldn't have said that out loud.
Known by many names.
And we'll be right back on the Narrowband Broadcast Network. Again, this is Keep Your Hat On. We'll be back. And welcome back for this last portion of our show. I'm Andrew Scott, along with Dr. Mark Peterson, Robert Anthony, and Chris Vacano. He says with a dangling question mark. So, Chris, you had been, for the last couple weeks, you've been going through your family tree and shaking out a bunch of nuts, as it were.
As it were.
Yeah, so let's put a tail on this donkey.
Wow.
And where have you come out with this? What's the latest news?
So just a very brief recap first. Summarizing what we learned from the DNA testing. Two really key points. One is that the person that we thought was my dad's father was not.
Right.
And so, and that's where my 25% Jewish comes from. There was some sort of extramarital engagement that resulted in his birth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a piece that I'm going to go off and explore and try to piece it together. I'm not optimistic.
Right.
Because
that's the
because
bit,
of the times
yeah,
and the records.
And that's the bit of this that was also kind of weaponized by one of your more distant family members. That they seem to have known this and were holding it over all the other Vacanos' heads.
And that's an important part of the epilogue here that I wanted to touch on is it was weaponized by virtue of the fact that we didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
They knew, we didn't.
Right.
And actually it was weaponized by all three. I mean, not just my dad's sister, but his parents.
Mm-hmm.
Man.
Yeah.
Once it became revealed, I mean, I realized in myself, and my brother and I talked about it, it just no longer has any influence, any control. It's what it is. I mean, and the fact that we have that piece of knowledge now has essentially inoculated us against any attacks.
It's taken the bullet out of the chamber. It's just an empty gun
exactly.
at this point. And
exactly. It's an empty gun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other piece, and I touched on this because, but I didn't go into it as part of our recap, and that's because it was still very sensitive at the time, and we were still trying to figure out what to do with that information.
Navigate it. Yeah.
And that's that my brother and I are actually half brothers. In other words, he had a different father than he has. I should say a different father.
Right. Yeah.
Than I do.
According to what you told me. Yeah.
Yeah. And it makes sense. My mom was married. She was 2 months pregnant when she married my dad. There was room for
other
a mistake
biology
to be made.
Yeah.
Other biology. Yeah. I mean, there was a possibility. Now,
And I just want to be clear. I just want to be clear here to our listeners and viewers that we are in no way judging your mother. I adore your mother.
Yeah. You actually got to spend some meaningful time with her this week, and yeah, and I mean, yeah, it's not at all about judgment, and that gets to the real epilogue piece here, which is our first response, my brother and I, when we were talking about this, and what do we do with this information?
Yeah, because that's kind of the elephant in the room.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
And our first instinct, my first instinct strongly was slam it back in the box, shut the lid, never talk about it again.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want my mom to feel any anxiety about being judged. I didn't want her to feel, and I also, if she knew, I didn't want her to feel any sort of guilt for not telling us. If she didn't know, I didn't want to deliver a huge shock to her system.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm going to put a quick asterisk in this story here and come back to something about your mom. So continue on.
Sure. Okay. And so I was thinking very much in terms of, we just shut this down to protect her. And
I think that was like 50-50 chance of that happening for anybody going through this.
Yeah. Yeah. And as the days passed after we made that decision, I just felt less and less right about it. I talked to you guys about it. I talked to a number of people, and Guido and I kept discussing it. And I kind of came back around a couple days later, and I'm like, I think we need to have this conversation. We're a family that doesn't keep secrets from each other. We don't lie to each other. Whenever we've tried that, it's always ended really badly. I want to be the one to broach the subject because I am now the outsider. I think I've got a bit more objectivity. I'm not in the center of that dynamic, right? And also, you haven't gotten a chance to spend a lot of time with my brother or meet him. Really.
No, I'm looking forward to that at some point too.
He's got a very different personality than I do, and he communicates in a very different way than I do. And I tend to be a bit more diplomatic. I tend to be a bit more soft in my touch.
He's WYSIWYG. And he's very WYSIWYG.
Yeah. And there are times where he's not even aware of how he's coming across.
Okay.
And I don't mean that as
no. I was just going to jump in as well and say for not for good or ill. It's just that's how some people are.
It's just the way it is. Yeah. And there are a lot of people in the world like that. So I volunteered to sort of step into the fold or step into the breach.
Yeah.
And deliver the information, but also tee it up in such a way so that my mom and Guido could carry on the conversation themselves.
Yeah, I remember we had that discussion when we were taking your car in. You were just like, how do I do this without making it seem like I'm lobbing a flaming bag of dog shit into the room and then running?
Well, yeah, and I'll tell you honestly, it was the single most difficult conversation I've ever had in my life. Not because it went badly. I mean, it went nearly perfectly. But in terms of in keeping with our theme, the amount of thinking that I had to do,
all the thinky pain.
Prior to the conversation and then during the conversation, and the careful navigation to deliver this very shocking, difficult message in a way that made a number of things clear. One, that nothing was going to change. Two, that there was no judgment. and that
and sometimes getting people to believe you when you say there's no judgment is its whole own different Everest to climb.
Well, and I got one really, really valuable piece of advice from my friend Michelle Soma, who is a listener. So hats off to you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Mad props.
Hats on to you.
That's right. Don't use the word judgment. Just stay away from that word. Stay away from any terminology.
That's actually a really
judgment.
good technique. You're right.
Because it's sort of I I forget the writer's name, but don't think of an elephant, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
We're all suddenly picturing an elephant. So yeah, I went into the conversation, and it became this conversation about. She actually, Mom turned to me and she actually said, "Wow, I could see this really disrupting a lot of families. This DNA poking around, this fascination that we're doing, and this very casual sort of thing we're doing with digging around in our DNA."
And that's where we had that conversation afterwards, where you're like, "That should be its whole own show." Is DNA results that just go off the cliff,
right? And luckily, in an interesting way, it's sort of brought us all closer together because we're all very intellectual sort of people, and we're all very curious about the world. And this became a shared set of mysteries for us to explore together.
Well, that brings us around to, how did your mom take it?
She actually took it very well. She was incredibly relieved that that she was worried that this would create distance between
you and Guido.
Between her and us.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah.
And
she suspected?
No, she was surprised.
Oh,
She actually doesn't recall ever having an encounter with that particular boyfriend that would result in a baby. I mean, that is Chris with his tap shoes on.
Right. I was just going to say, well navigated, son.
But we spent a fair bit of time talking about that time in her life, and that was a challenging and difficult time for a variety of reasons that I won't go into here because that's her story and not mine to tell. But yeah, so she was relieved that to hear and know that we weren't going that direction, that things were not going to go that direction. She was very sort of intellectually curious about it. And she actually had started to ask me questions about Guido's dad, which, and if I could reel it back earlier in the week where I finally made the decision that I have to have this conversation and I have to have it soon.
Oh yeah, I remember this.
Was Guido had made contact and had an hour long FaceTime with his father and his father's wife.
Yeah, he legit went out and found his biological father.
Found him, and he's still alive and retired, and they had a wonderful conversation.
And Guido is apparently the spitting image of.
Very, very similar characteristics. Yeah. I saw a picture and it looks, and it makes everything makes so much more sense now. But the fact that Mom asked me, she was like, "Well, Guido's not going to go out and try to find him, is he?" And I'm like, you need to have that conversation with Guido. I can't talk about
that's
this.
That's the time. Yeah, that's the portion of the story where you fob that off. You go, "Nah, this ain't my part."
Yeah, it's like that is information that I am not at liberty to reveal.
Well, I remember when we were talking, one of the things that I brought up, because the order of operations here is that we started talking about this on the show before you got your your results, your lab results back. And I remember just asking you as a point of best practices as a producer going, should you be talking about this on a public forum? And the thing, my asterisk coming back from earlier was, again, Chris and my partner Heather were married. They have a wonderful adopted son, Ryan. Hi, Ryan. Sorry I said your name on the interwebs. But he just graduated high school, and we had, for the first time since well before the pandemic, we had an actual gathering of like a big chunk of the family. Including Heather's parents and Chris's mom was there, and it was a good time had by all. But one of the things that I was so touched by, I cannot tell you what this meant to me, is we were wrapping up, and your mom comes through the kitchen and goes, Andrew, I just wanted to tell you, I've been watching some of your videos, and you boys are very good. And my heart just went blam.
Good night, everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And so my fear.
Thank you, Detroit. We love you. Tip your waitress.
Exactly. Try the veal. No, it was great because I was concerned that your mother would feel, I don't know, outed or uncomfortable or something like that. But having had this talk and knowing that the episode that she probably just watched was actually the one where we started exploring this, made me feel really, really good. And that's, man, if I have to say that we've got a tent pole on this show, is that no matter what we talk about, we kind of want to leave feeling better than we did before we started. And no, that's not always going to be possible. But frankly, the world needs more of this. And the world needs more.
That's the hallmark of any good therapy.
Right? Is just feeling better than, well, and I say the same thing about meditation, Ty. When somebody asked me about why I sit and meditate for an hour at a time, even though it's uncomfortable, and I think bad thoughts, and I feel like shit when I'm doing it, I always answer, because without exception, I always feel feeling better having done it than not having done it. Well, even if it's just to get to the other side and say, I did it.
And you just nailed. I mean, even though that conversation was so difficult, having had it was such a massive relief.
The first time you drop a weight off, you feel like you can fly. And that's just it. Right. It's a wonderful experience. But the only other thing I've got today, and I just want to give a shout out to Michael Packard, 56 years old, of Provincetown, Massachusetts, got swallowed by a humpback whale. I don't know what that sound effect was right now. But yeah, he got swallowed by a humpback whale while he was out lobster diving, and was in there for about 40 seconds before the whale spat him out. Michael Packard, you are the luckiest guy on land or sea. And
you get the Jonah Award.
Any injuries?
The only thing he said was that he was bruised up pretty badly.
Yeah,
but had no broken bones of any kind.
I saw an interview with him.
Oh, did you really?
And at first he thought it was a shark.
Right, but then he said I didn't feel any pain, and then I suddenly sensed the motion of the whale swimming.
So he said that he didn't feel any teeth initially.
Yeah.
So it couldn't have been a shark.
Right.
And it wasn't until the whale spit him out that he kind of realized what it was.
Yeah, he had just been banging into the baleen for a while until he went, oh, this is a monkey. I don't eat monkeys. I eat little krill and shit.
So a humpback's mouth. I mean, honestly, this is. I mean, aside from being a little kid and in a Catholic grade school, and trying to picture a human inside of a whale's mouth and wondering if a whale's mouth is actually big enough to hold a human.
It certainly is.
Evidently it is.
Yeah. And the choke point, pardon, I'm going to drop the rim shot in here. The choke point is that while the whale's mouth is easily big enough to hold multiple people, their esophagus is not big enough to swallow. So that's why he literally made the whale choke him up by just being bigger than a shrimp. But again, Mr. Packard, from everybody here at Keep Your Hat On, I guess we'll have to say keep your mask on and your regulator in. But gosh, that's what I got. I think that's what we got. Thanks for joining us again. We're Keep Your Hat On guys. We're not doing anything special. We're just here hanging out, talking to you, looking pretty on the cameras. But we would really encourage you, if you have questions for any of us, we put our email addresses in the video. We've got contact information down below. If you would be so kind as to support us in some way, shape, or form, you can do so via Patreon, link below. And otherwise, do get a hold of us. Ask us things, give us stuff that you want to hear us talk about or riff about or bullshit about, because we're kings of at least one of those things. But until next time, everybody take care of yourself. Please, again, get your shot. The more shots we have, the closer we are to herd immunity. All the news about the shots is pretty much good. So get it so we can get the hell out of this and get into whatever's next. I'm Andrew Scott. That's Chris Vicano. That's Robert Anthony. That's Dr. Mark C.E. Peterson. We're Keep Your Hat On, and we will see you next time. Thanks again for joining us, everybody. Bye-bye, take care, and again, keep your hat on. We may end up miles from here. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.
Well, there's a chunk of time you can't get back. From Portland, Oregon, this has been Keep Your Hat On, a big little show about a whole lot of nothing in particular. Keep Your Hat On is a narrowband broadcast network production in association with PodSquadPDX.com. Andrew Scott, executive producer. Robert Anthony and Chris Vicano, associate producers. Our theme music was written and produced by Andrew Scott, along with help from Ron Kajawa. Website design and maintenance by Vicano Creative, Chris Vicano Webmaster. Available at VicanoCreative.com. Audio and video production by Andrew Scott, available at AndrewScottMedia.com. Got ideas or comments for the show? Email us at talkback@kyhopodcast.com, and don't forget to like, click, and subscribe. On behalf of the boys, I'm your announcer, Michael Brumage. Thanks for listening. I guess.
NBBN.
The Narrowband Broadcast Network.
The focus is on you.